pro-Palestinian protest was banned in France, and 49 people were arrested at the White House protest led by Jewish groups calling for a ceasefire. In Israel, the communications minister, Shlomo Kari, helped to create and promote regulations allowing for the imprisonment of citizens who, quote, harm national morale. These draft emergency regulations are titled Limiting Aid to the Enemy Through Communication. At a time when Netanyahu is being broadly condemned by the citizens of Israel, these regulations open the door for the Israeli government to arrest, remove from their homes, or seize the property of anyone sharing information, not misinformation, important to note, any information that could harm national morale or serve as the basis for enemy propaganda. And this does not only apply to individuals, citizens, this applies to news outlets as well. Just today, October 19th, The Intercept reported that, quote, Europe's largest news aggregator has ordered editors to play down Palestinian deaths. Quote, Upday, the largest news aggregator app in Europe, handed down directives to color the company's coverage of the war in Gaza with pro-Israeli sentiment. They gave instructions to prioritize the Israeli perspective and minimize Palestinian civilian deaths in coverage, according to these employees. They said, quote, we can't push anything involving Palestinian death tolls or casualties without information about Israel coming higher up in the story. So they have to couch anything that is showing the violence that the Palestinians are experiencing behind information about, Israel and the horrors that they've experienced. Is there anything here that there's so much more in terms of censorship. Is there anything else here that you want to bring up as an example, or did you hear anything that I'm missing here?
I think a lot of times when we're hearing stories like this, it's hard to, I think, really contextualize it again because of the stories that we've been told here in America for so long. The story of Israel good, Palestine bad. I think that propaganda has really infiltrated so many people for so long that, there's almost like an inherent bias that you have to overcome, even if the truth is right in front of you. For instance, if you have Russia, in the war with Ukraine, when in the beginning stages of that war, when we were getting reports that Russian state media was, cutting off lines of communication, they wouldn't let their own people kind of see what was happening in Ukraine. They were only allowing just state information to go to their people. If people were protesting against the war, they were locked up. We saw protests happening in Moscow and St. Petersburg because of that. And back here in the US, when you were seeing a nation essentially censoring information and punishing dissent, everyone rightfully said, that's insane. And that is not democratic. And we completely are against that. Yeah. But now you are seeing a country that we call our ally exemplifying the exact same behavior. And what's going on? Why isn't there calls to, denounce this? Why aren't there people speaking out against it? Why are people justifying it? When you peel back the layers a little bit, you have to ask yourself, is a country doing these things actually bad or not? Or is it only bad when it's somebody who you don't like? For me, I think state censorship is a bad thing, regardless of which state it is. And so I would hope that people could see through what's happening in Israel right now. If you feel the need to lock up people who are going against national morale, if you are willing to silence anyone who is putting out information that you do not like, how often is that being perpetrated by a country that's in the right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're not in the right, but they are far right. They are, I think very much bordering on very overtly fascist nation. The fact that they're doing this, the way that they use their military, it's just insane what Israel has been doing. I don't know. Would you call it fascism?
For me, it just really breaks down to something being this simple. When we talk about, and, people all the time talk about how, here in America, like we have the freedom of speech, and sometimes people will groan on about like, oh, how their speech is being limited, and some
Mhm.
people will have a hard time saying like, oh, I'm not really proud to be an American for this, that, and this reason. I have to say, for all the problems that come with freedom of speech, I think it's an overall necessary thing to have in any country. And whenever I see any entity for any reason kind of silencing speech, it always makes me a little hesitant. When we see tech companies who are out there limiting speech, or in this, or if the government is trying to come after people for certain speech, it always seems like it starts with the best of intentions, and then it always ends up devolving into an authoritarianism, just kind of like pushing down any kind of dissent that will eventually look to be rightfully so. And now so when I'm looking at another country that doesn't have the same protections that we do, like in Israel, where they are allowed to criminalize speech, that's incredibly scary. Fascism definitely applies here.
Yeah.
No country, in my opinion, should have the ability to lock up somebody for dissenting against government policy. And what kind of climate are you creating that way? And again, if you really feel as though that you have the right to be doing what you claim that you are doing, then you wouldn't need to be locking up people for dissenting. And maybe this is coming at the fact that recent polls out of Israel, from the Jerusalem Post particularly, are showing that 80% of people in this particular poll saying that they blamed Prime Minister Netanyahu for this war. And
Mhm.
so this war is just not as popular as I think as the government wants it to be, and they're trying to, I guess, insulate themselves from as much criticism as they possibly can. And it's very telling. It's very telling right now what they're trying to do. And I hope that more people see it for what it is, because they they are in a position of weakness right now, and it's definitely showing.
Yeah. And how scary is it that they are talking about information that could harm morale, not even misinformation, but just sharing the truth of what's happening, sharing the truth of what Israel's doing, any of it would harm your country's morale,
Yeah.
telling them the truth about any of it. And they see through the lies. The Israeli people, a lot of them are seeing through these lies. Um, so yeah, it's insane to me that a country could crack down this much at this point and be considered the shining example of democracy in the Middle East, whereas all these like, you know, Arab countries that don't care about democracy, this is supposed to be that one exception. But no, we're seeing that that is not the exception at all. I mean, it was already an apartheid state where a lot of the people there don't have any rights. But this is just to a degree that is absolutely insane. Um, yeah, I hopefully we won't see stuff like this in the US in the future, and I wouldn't be surprised if we did.
No, I mean, we're kind of seeing it already, unfortunately. We are seeing certain tech companies who have been, I mean, Meta had to come out recently and essentially apologize for the fact that so many posts that were using certain hashtags, like that were pro-Palestinian, were either getting taken off their platforms altogether, or were being essentially shadow banned. So
Mhm.
stuff like that, you always hear like rumblings about like, oh, is this happening, is this happening, is it not happening? But the fact that Meta had to come out and essentially apologize for it happening, they were
Yeah,
admitting that it was in fact happening,
yeah.
which you almost never see these tech companies that admit that they're censoring information. So I'm seeing certain things that are troubling here on YouTube. As we are
Mhm.
creating an episode here on YouTube, I'm seeing YouTube kind of censor some information. So it's incredibly troubling what we're seeing here in America as well. It's not, our speech isn't being silenced or criminalized, but dissent is trying to be combated. To which, in my
Mhm.
mind, a government having any kind of, or tech companies having kind of any sway over speech, it always feels very concerning, because it just makes you wonder like what could happen if people don't speak against it. Will this get
Yeah,
worse?
yeah. And I'm sure we will talk about the censorship of social media content more in the future, because it is such a big issue. And it's something that I've dealt with, and a lot of the people that I know have dealt with a lot. Um, but yeah, I mean, it is just it is getting so out of control. I even saw that some of the photos from the Al Ahli hospital were censored for like sexual content, which were taken down, and that was the explanation. That it was too sexual, and like that is wild. I mean, that's probably an algorithm doing something, but it would not be unusual for Meta to just be taking down the content just because it is saying pro-Palestinian stuff. We've seen it time and time again, and I plan to talk with an activist who has had so many of her accounts taken down, who is a Palestinian woman, and she will be talking about that on the show hopefully in the coming days.